What up, what up? That's them Hit Squad, and welcome back, guys. Here's your boy Sean.
And your girl Mel.
Yes,
Welcome
yes.
S&M Squad.
Hell to the ad.
How are you guys doing today? We hope you guys are absolutely amazing.
Yes, guys. If not, let's turn around. All right, we diving in some movies, guys. All right.
Okay.
So we got You Don't Realize How Perfect Band of Brothers Is.
Okay. What's Band of Brothers?
I believe it's a movie.
Okay.
I'm thinking in my mind. We found it inside the comment section. And, before we get into it, guys, go ahead and smash that like button, turn on that notification bell so you guys can be notified the next time we upload. We try to upload daily. All right.
All right.
And here we go. Turn it on. Hype this video up.
Something quite powerful happens at the end of episode 1 of Band of Brothers. Across 10 episodes, it's the only time the series ever does this. There's no music cue to underline it, no dialogue to explain its meaning. The paratroopers, moments before taking part in one of the largest invasions in the history of warfare, look directly into the camera, straight into the lens. For a brief moment, the distance between them and us collapses, and the weight of what they're about to face lands somewhere uncomfortably close. On a first viewing, we're sitting at home absorbed by the scale of it all, and then the men look directly at you. In that moment, the spectacle drops away, and the filmmakers invite you to remember that these were real people. I never really clocked this when I was younger. Back then it just felt cool. Now it reads very differently. That look isn't about connection, it's about weight. It places the burden of what's coming not just on them, but briefly on us as well. This moment has always stayed with me. It's the first thing I think about every time I revisit Band of Brothers, and it's unlocked a realization. This isn't just a great war series, it's one that changes as you do. With each rewatch of the series, it feels less heroic and more honest. By dissecting the deliberate choices the filmmakers make, you begin to see why Band of Brothers doesn't fade with time, it actually gets more popular.
Okay.
More than 2 decades after its release, it remains one of the highest rated television miniseries ever, holding a 9.4 rating on IMDb. And the longevity isn't driven by spectacle or nostalgia, it comes from something much rarer, an attention to the men at the center of it all. Their portrayal isn't heroic or overtly patriotic, and it never feels like propaganda, something so many films about America at war fell into back then, and still do today. Now, if you've never seen Band of Brothers, I can't recommend it enough. It'll deepen your respect for the people who took part in the fighting during World War II. The series gives you a first-hand sense of what these soldiers endured in the belief that they were helping to put an end to something truly evil. And when you watch it, remembering that these men weren't born soldiers, all were ordinary civilians with ordinary jobs, you begin to see the series differently. Not as a story about heroes, but as a record of what was asked of men who never set out to be anything more than that.
Whoa.
Clear that sector on the right.
Now, before diving in, a bit of context. Band of Brothers is a 10-part HBO miniseries that follows Easy Company of the
HBO.
506 Parachute Infantry Regiment from training in Georgia through to the end of World War II. It's based on the non-fiction book of the same name by historian Stephen Ambrose, which was built from interviews with the real men who served. The series is often associated with Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, coming off the success of Saving Private Ryan, but this was very much Hanks's project. He was deeply involved at every level, driven by a desire not to mythologize the war, but to honor the men who lived through it, by letting their experience speak for themselves. Which goes hand in hand with one of the most creatively radical choices the series makes. Every episode of Band of Brothers opens with short interview snippets from the real men of Easy Company. At first, you don't know who they are. There are no names, no context, just elderly men reflecting on what you're about to see. When I was younger, I used to skip straight past these moments. Now, I find myself leaning in, holding on to every word. As you get older, you realize these interviews aren't framing devices, they're anchors. You watch these men struggle to speak, sometimes breaking down, describing moments that you then see play out 20 minutes later on screen.
Oh my Lord.
What we're watching stops feeling like dramatization and starts feeling like testimony. And then, when episode 10 ends, the series makes its last powerful move. The interviews return, But this time, the names of the soldiers are revealed. Suddenly, the characters you've spent 10 hours with are no longer characters at all. They're the men sitting in front of you. And the weight of that realization hits hard.
Wow.
Because
is
by the
deep.
time you're told who they are, you already know exactly who they've been.
Incredible.
It's a poignant creative choice that collapses the distance between performance and memory and only becomes more powerful with each rewatch.
Wow,
I've read Band of Brothers more
They
times
look
than I
like
can
him.
remember
Similar,
now.
right?
So much so that my book is falling apart. And if you've read the book and seen the series, you'll know they aren't alike in structure. Stephen Ambrose's book tells the story of Easy Company in a largely linear way, from training through to the years after the war. The series follows that same timeline, but it makes a crucial change. Instead of treating Easy Company as a single collective, Band of Brothers anchors each episode around the subjective point of view of one man. Across 10 episodes, we're repeatedly asked to see the war through different eyes. That's no small task for filmmakers, and I say filmmakers, not just the writers, as the producers and Stephen Ambrose had a say on this. Choosing whose experience carries each chapter of the story is a creative gamble, but it's one that pays off. By shifting perspective from episode to episode, the series builds a broader, more human understanding of what these men endured, not as a unit, but as individuals living the same war in a very different way. While Dick Winters ultimately becomes the closest thing Band of Brothers has to a central figure, with his perspective anchoring episodes 1, 2, 5, and 10, the series doesn't let one man define the war. Instead, each episode hands the story to someone else, and in doing so, changes the experience for the audience.
I like
I
that.
like
In
it.
episode
that's
3,
good.
through the perspective of Albert Blythe, we feel the fear and psychological paralysis before we ever understand courage. Episode 4, we're with Bull Randleman, and the war becomes about isolation and survival. In episode 6, we're in Bastogne, seeing things through the eyes of medic Eugene Rowe. The conflict is no longer about tactics or victory, but about endurance and scarcity. Episode 7 focuses entirely on Carwood Lipton and shifts the focus inward, revealing how morale collapses not from defeat, but from exhaustion. Episode 8, Webster's Return, shows how war reshapes identity, creating distance even among brothers. And Episode 9, told through Nixon's perspective, we see disillusionment and moral reckoning finally surface, culminating in the brutal confrontation with what the war was actually fighting against. Taken together, these perspectives don't just broaden the story, they fracture it. The audience isn't given a single heroic through line, but a whole host of experiences that, piece by piece, builds a fuller understanding of what the war demanded of these men. Not one story, but many, all happening at once. These shifting character
deep.
perspectives are crucial. I don't think Band of Brothers would still resonate the way it does if it were just another war series methodically recreating events and operations.
Yeah.
This approach places the audience uncomfortably close to what's happening. At its core, good filmmaking is about making you feel something, and while that can be achieved through camera movement, music, editing, or colour, nothing is more effective than perspective. Take one of the most epic images in the entire series, the Allied Armada crossing from England to France, hundreds of ships, endless planes.
Whoa.
For the first time on screen, audiences were given a true sense of what the largest invasion in history actually looked like. The scale
largest
is honestly
invasion?
mind-boggling. The
Largest
camera starts on
invasion
Dick
in
Winters,
history.
sitting at the open door of the plane, and then breaks away from his perspective to reveal the massive armada. It's a brilliant reversal. By rooting us
this
in
is
Winters'
deep.
perspective before revealing the scale of the invasion, the series reframes the spectacle into something deeply human. The war doesn't arrive as history or strategy. It arrives the way it always does, through the eyes of the men who have to step into it.
Right.
And that perspective only really reveals its purpose when the shooting starts. Because the first time Easy Company enters combat, the first time the audience gets to see some of the men in a mini battle, the series strips away any remaining distance between us and the men inside it. I'm talking about episode 2, the assault on the German artillery position at Brecott Manor. And what's striking is how different this sequence feels compared to almost every battle that follows. Dirt and smoke constantly appear in the foreground, while unseen muzzle flashes even flare through the frame. Even the sound design is nearly deafening in this
Make
particular
it seem so
firefight.
real.
All designed for complete immersion, but the key choice comes down to perspective again. In one extended moment towards the end of the fight, the camera stays practically glued to Dick Winters as he moves through the trench, firing and advancing. The camera isn't literally attached to him, but it mimics his movement so closely that it may as well be. The result is an all-consuming point of view. We're not watching Winters clear the trench, we're moving with him. And in doing that, the series doesn't just show us combat for the first time, it places us inside it, before we've had time to understand what that really means. Now, I'm trying to shine a light on creative choices that haven't been spoken about in breakdowns of Band of Brothers before, but there is one I can't ignore, because even if you already know about it, its impact is possibly the single reason as to why this series ages so well. I'm talking about the intensive 2-week military-style boot camp the actors underwent prior to filming. That fact is often mentioned in relation to performance and camaraderie, but what's rarely discussed is how deeply it shapes the language of the series, whether we consciously notice it or not. Of course, the training shows in the battle sequences. You believe these men are soldiers, but it's felt more strongly in the quieter moments, in how they move without thinking, how actions happen instinctively, how weapons are handled with a kind of unconscious familiarity. We're picking up on all these little details on a subconscious level. All those small, almost invisible details communicate something vital, that what we're watching isn't being performed for us, it's almost unfolding naturally. There are war films that don't put their actors through anything resembling the experience of the soldiers they're playing, and as a result, the whole thing ends up feeling performed, and performances age with time. What Band of Brothers does differently is ask its actors to internalize the physical language of being a soldier.
Wow.
They weren't just playing Easy Company. To a small degree, they became it. And that difference, which is almost invisible, is why the series still feels lived in rather than staged, even decades later. In episode 7, the series makes a bold shift. For the first time, we get a narrator, First Sergeant Carwood Lipton, played by Donnie Wahlberg, and in doing so, completely reframes how we experience the war. This period of Easy Company's deployment through Bastogne and the capture of Foy had already cemented their legendary status long before Band of Brothers was ever made. Newspapers at the time celebrated them as symbols of American grit and defiance. But instead of leaning into that mythology, which could have easily come off as American pro-war propaganda, the series does something far more interesting. It turns inward. Through Lipton's narration, we're shown a company under immense psychological strain and who are beginning to fracture. Rather than glorifying the legend, the filmmakers strip it back and show us the raw, lived-in experience of the men who endured. This is topped off by one of my favourite creative choices in the entire series. I'd never seen anything like it before in film or television, and the first time I watched it, it drove home, more clearly than anything else, what a soldier laying down their life actually feels like. At the end of episode 7, Carwood Lipton reflects on the men Easy Company has lost since entering Belgium. After spending the previous hours watching these men endure a brutal winter, living under constant artillery fire, they're finally brought indoors, into a church, bathed in soft candlelight. It's a stark contrast. Lipton tells us they arrived with 145 men and will be leaving with just 63. The number lands hard on its own, but the series doesn't leave it there. As he speaks, we see the company sitting together, and one by one, the men who've been killed, wounded or taken off the line begin to fade from the frame. They just vanish from the group. It's a quiet, almost cruelly simple piece of filmmaking that reframes loss not as action, but as absence. These men were here, now they're not. And as a local choir sings, the moment feels almost spiritual. Not because it offers comfort, but because it forces us to sit with what loss and survival actually looks like once the fighting stops. I know I don't shy away from using the word masterpiece on this channel, especially when something has moved me creatively, but Band of Brothers truly earns it. There's an extraordinary level of care in every creative choice, and so much of it continues to reveal itself over time. Before wrapping up, there's one final moment I want to focus on, because it quietly encapsulates what this series has been saying all along. The final scene with Easy Company playing baseball, as Dick Winters narrates what the men did after the war. Even now writing this, it gives me chills. There's no triumph, no grandness, just the simple truth that these men went home. They became postmen, construction workers, farmers, ordinary lives lived quietly. They weren't chasing recognition or legacy. They answered the call when it mattered, endured something unimaginable, and then returned to lives that rarely reflected what they'd been through. With this final scene, the series makes its point unmistakably clear. This was never a story about heroes. It was a story about ordinary men.
Ordinary man.
Band of
Wow.
Brothers stands as one of the most important
I like
pieces
that.
of television ever made. It understands something most war stories miss. It doesn't chase heroism or spectacle. It chases the experiences of the men. And as you
I
get
love
older,
that.
that focus only grows more powerful.
Wow.
Okay.
I love how he broke it down.
Yes, the narrator definitely broke that down in a way that, you know, we can feel it
Yeah.
and make us actually want to watch
I
the.
most definitely want to
series.
watch the series.
Yes.
And I like how he says it's not about the heroes, but it's about the men, the
Yeah.
stories of the men.
Ordinary
And
man.
it's just so amazing how the guys who lived that were there to guide them through telling their stories, you know?
Yeah.
Incredible.
They made it seem so real, like you was on the battlefield, like you was in the trenches, actually fighting the war with these guys. And, you know, big ups to the filmmaker. I think his name's Steven Spielberg, I believe, and a couple other guys. I believe they
Hanks.
did Tom Hanks was one of them.
Yeah.
They did an amazing job, you know.
Yes.
So this snippet got us, you know, wanting to watch 10 episodes of this
Yeah, most definitely.
Band of Brothers. And you know, I just take my hat off to these guys that fought in this war in World War II.
And they are heroes too.
They're heroes in our eyes. Absolutely.
Grandfather fought in World War II.
Yes, absolutely.
So I most definitely want to watch this series.
Yeah, I definitely want to support the movie, but we want to thank you guys, all right, for dropping this off inside the comment section. We definitely appreciate it. This is one of those movies that, you know, you don't want to miss. It's a lot of history, a lot of action, and it's a lot of realness to it.
Yes.
You know, these guys put their life on the line.
Absolutely.
We're so grateful and so
Salute.
honored to react to this. All right, so guys, go ahead and smash that like button, give this video a big fat thumbs up, and also get inside the comment section.
All right,
We
guys.
appreciate the love, and we are signing off.
Have an amazing day on purpose.
Peace.
Peace.